Received only a house in the sewage for 28 years of work, but what she found inside. Sarah Miller never imagined that 3 decades of tireless dedication could amount to so little. At 42, with calloused hands and a body aching from so many years, scrubbing floors and cleaning bathrooms at Grace Memorial Hospital, she received as her only compensation a house that seemed more like a sentence to despair. It was on Monday morning that the hospital supervisor, Mr. Arthur, appeared at her small rented house in the low-income outskirts of the town of Biloxi, where she lived with her 2 children, 8-year-old Jacob and 6-year-old Emily. He carried in his hands a rusty key and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah, I have good news for you," he said, avoiding looking directly at her. "The hospital administration has decided to recognize your years of service. We managed to get a house for you and the children." Sarah's heart raced. After so many years paying rent with her miserable salary, she would finally have a roof of her own. Jacob and Emily ran to their mother's side, their eyes shining with curiosity. "Our own house, Mommy?" asked Emily, tugging at the hem of her mother's faded skirt. "Where is it?" Jacob wanted to know, always the more practical of the two. Mr. Arthur cleared his throat softly, a sign Sarah knew well after so long working under his orders. It was the same sound he made when he had to deliver bad news disguised as good. "It's over there near the river on the backside of town. It's a simple house, but it's yours." Sarah took the key with trembling hands. After 28 years dedicating every minute of her life to that hospital, cleaning vomit, blood and tears from the floors, this would be her reward. Her own house. No matter what it was like, it would be theirs. That same afternoon, she and the children took the bus to the address Mr. Arthur had scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper. The journey took almost an hour, passing through neighborhoods increasingly distant from the town center until they reached an area Sarah had never visited before. The smell hit her nostrils before she could even see the house. It was a strong, nauseating odor that made their eyes sting and throats tighten. Emily covered her nose with both little hands, while Jacob made a face of disgust. "Mommy, what's that awful smell?" complained Emily, her voice muffled by her hands. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. In front of her, among rubble and vacant lots, stood the house that would be her new home. The wooden structure was visibly deteriorated, with loose boards, window frames without glass, and a roof that looked ready to collapse. Next to the house, a thick pipe dumped dirty water straight onto the land, forming a small stream of sewage that passed just a few meters from the front door. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Sarah's hands trembled as she put the key in the lock. The door creaked loudly, as if protesting being opened after being closed for so long. The inside of the house was even worse than she had imagined. There was only one main room, with a wooden floor rotten in several spots, walls stained with damp, and a ceiling with obvious leaks. "Is this where we're going to live?" asked Jacob, his voice echoing in the empty space. Sarah knelt and hugged both children, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on welling up. 28 years of her life dedicated to that hospital, 28 years waking up at 4 in the morning to arrive punctually for work, 28 years enduring humiliation, late paychecks, and precarious conditions. And this was her reward. "We'll make it work, my loves," she whispered, her voice choked. "It's our house now, we'll make it a home." In the following days, Sarah Miller stretched herself thin trying to make that place livable. She managed to borrow some buckets to catch water from the leaks, brought the few pieces of furniture she owned from her rented house, and tried to cover the most visible holes in the floorboards with planks she found on the neighboring lots. The smell of sewage was constant, penetrating. No matter how much she scrubbed the floor with disinfectant, no matter how much she kept the windows open, the nauseating odor seemed to have seeped into the walls, the wood, the very air they breathed. Emily began to have constant headaches, and Jacob developed a dry cough that wouldn't go away. "Mommy, I don't want to live here anymore," Emily whimpered on the third night, curled up on her makeshift bed on the floor. "I don't either, my love," Sarah admitted, stroking her daughter's hair. "But it's all we have right now." It was on the morning of the fourth day, while trying to clean a stubborn stain in the corner of the room, that Sarah noticed something strange. One of the floorboards was looser than the others, wobbling when she stepped on it. Intrigued, she grabbed a kitchen knife and tried to pry the board up. With a crack, the rotten wood came loose completely, revealing a hole in the subfloor. And there, in the middle of the dark, damp earth, was something that made Sarah's heart stop for a moment. A metal box, rusty but still intact, was buried just beneath the floorboards. With trembling hands, she pulled the box from the earth. It wasn't very large, about the size of a shoebox, but it weighed more than she expected. It had a simple lock, but rust had rendered it useless. With a little force, the lid opened with a creak. What Sarah saw inside the box made her legs buckle. Hundreds of letters, all carefully stacked and tied with faded ribbons, all addressed to her, all with post office stamps dated over the last 15 years, all marked "Return to sender, addressee not found." "My God," she murmured, picking up the first letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The sender was always the same. Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison. Sarah knew that name. She vaguely remembered an elderly lady who had spent a few months hospitalized years ago. A kind woman, always alone, who never received visitors. She opened the first letter carefully, trying not to tear the paper already made fragile by time and moisture. The handwriting was elegant, from an educated person, and the words Sarah read finally made her tears flow freely. "My dear Sarah, I hope this letter finds you well. I know it may seem strange to receive a letter from a hospital patient, but I need to tell you something very important. During the months I was hospitalized, you were the only person who treated me with true kindness and attention. Do you remember how we used to talk during your breaks? How you would bring me hot tea on cold nights when I couldn't sleep?" Sarah remembered. She remembered Mrs. Elizabeth perfectly, always in bed in room 507, alone and melancholy. She had spent many work breaks talking with the lady, listening to stories from her youth, bringing her small comforts that were not part of her duties. She continued reading. "I have something very important to tell you, my child. I have no close family, and during my stay in the hospital you became like a daughter to me. Therefore, I have made a decision that I hope you will accept with an open heart." Sarah's hands trembled even more. She opened another letter, more recent. Then another. All told the same story. All desperately tried to communicate the same information. Mrs. Elizabeth had passed away 2 years ago, but before that, she had made a will leaving a significant inheritance to Sarah. A substantial sum of money and a property in the countryside of the region. The problem was that the lawyer responsible for the will could not locate Sarah Miller, as she had changed addresses several times over the years, always in search of cheaper rents. In the last letter, dated just a year ago, was the contact information for Mr. Walter Vance Esquernes, the lawyer handling the estate. Sarah read and reread that letter, unable to believe what was written there. If you are reading this letter, it means you have finally managed to receive it. Please seek out Mr. Walter Vance Esquernes at the office on Willow Street, number 234. He has all the information about the inheritance I left for you. But there is a condition, my daughter. You will need to prove that you truly cared for me during my hospitalization, as I know the hospital administration does not keep detailed records of the extra care that staff provide out of the kindness of their hearts. Sarah sat on the rotten floor of the house, surrounded by the scattered letters, and cried as she hadn't cried in years. She cried for Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's kindness. She cried for the years of suffering. She cried for the hope that now blossomed in her chest like a flower in the middle of the desert. Jacob and Emily had arrived from school and found their mother in that state. They ran to hug her, frightened by so many tears. "Mommy, what happened? Why are you crying?" asked Emily, wiping the tears from her mother's face with her small hands. "They are tears of hope, my love," answered Sarah, hugging her children. "Perhaps our life is going to change." The next day, Sarah requested time off from the hospital and went to the address mentioned in the letters. Mr. Walter Vance Esquernes' office was in the center of town, in an old but well-maintained building. She had worn her best clothes, a simple but clean dress, and had carefully combed her hair. The secretary received her with a certain coldness, observing her simple clothes and calloused hands. She said the doctor was busy and that she should schedule an appointment. Sarah explained about the letters, about Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison, but the woman merely shook her head with disdain. Look, dear, the gentleman sees a lot of people who claim to be beneficiaries of inheritances. Do you have any documentation? Any proof? Sarah showed the letters, told about her discovery in the precarious house. The secretary examined them quickly, with the air of someone who had seen many scam attempts. I'll see if the doctor can see you, but I promise nothing. After 2 hours of waiting, Sarah was finally called in. Mr. Walter Vance, Esky, was a middle-aged, elegant man with gold-rimmed glasses and a well-tailored suit. He received her behind a mahogany desk, surrounded by shelves filled with law books. "You are Sarah Miller?" he asked, examining the letters she had brought. "Yes, sir. I worked at Grace Memorial Hospital for 28 years. I cared for Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison during her hospitalization." The lawyer nodded slowly, his expressions alternating between interest and skepticism. Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison did indeed leave a will benefiting a hospital employee by that name. The problem is, we need concrete proof that you are indeed the person mentioned in the will and that you actually provided the special care she describes. What kind of proof? Hospital records proving you worked in the unit where she was hospitalized, witnesses who can confirm the extra care, documentation that proves your identity and work history. Sarah's heart sank. She knew the hospital kept poor records, especially for cleaning staff, and as for the extra care she gave patients, that had never been officially documented. "Doctor, I can get my work history from the hospital, but, he encouraged her to continue, the care I provided for Mrs. Elizabeth was done during my breaks, outside my official hours. I don't know if that's recorded anywhere." Mr. Walter Vance, Esken, leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah Miller's face carefully. "The inheritance is substantial, Miss Miller. Nearly $500,000 in cash and a rural property valued at several million more. Without solid proof, I can't simply hand over that amount to anyone who shows up with a few letters. $500,000. Sarah had never imagined so much money together. It was more than she would earn in 10 whole lifetimes working as a cleaner. "I understand, sir. I'll get the proof you need. There's one more thing," he said, his voice growing more serious. "There is another interested party in the inheritance. Mrs. Elizabeth's nephew, Sterling Harrison. He is contesting the will, claiming his aunt was not of sound mind when she made this donation to a stranger." Sarah's world seemed to collapse again. Of course there would be complications. Nothing in her life had ever been simple. And what does that mean? It means that even if we can prove your right to the inheritance, we will have to face a legal battle. Sterling Harrison has hired one of the best law firms in the region. It will be a difficult fight. Sarah left the office with her head spinning. On one side, the hope of a better life for her and her children. On the other, the reality that she would have to face powerful, well-connected people to get what was rightfully hers. Her first stop was at Grace Memorial Hospital, where she had spent the best decades of her life. She looked for Mr. Arthur, the supervisor who had given her the key to the shabby house. "Mr. Arthur, I need my complete work documentation from here at the hospital." He looked at her with suspicion. "Why do you want that, Sarah?" She explained about the inheritance, about Mrs. Elizabeth, about the letters she found. His expression gradually changed from suspicion to something that seemed almost like panic. "Sarah, you need to forget this story. This kind of thing only brings trouble. You have a stable job here, a house." "A house in the middle of the sewage," she interrupted. "After 28 years, that was my reward. A place where my children breathe toxic fumes every day." "Look, let me give you some advice. These inheritances never work out. You'll spend money on a lawyer, you'll waste time, and in the end you won't get anything. Stay quiet in your corner and be thankful for what you have." But Sarah was no longer willing to stay quiet. She went to the hospital's Human Resources Department, a cramped little room in the basement of the administrative building. The clerk in charge, Ms. Linda, greeted her with a strained smile. "Why exactly do you want your work records?" "I need to prove which departments I worked in all these years." Ms. Linda went to a dusty file cabinet and began shuffling through folders. After searching for a long time, she came back with a confused expression. "That's strange. According to our records, you only ever worked in general cleaning. You were never assigned to specific inpatient units." "What do you mean? I cleaned room 507 and several other rooms in the inpatient wing. I did that for years." "It's not here in the records. It says you only worked in common areas, hallways, public restrooms, reception." Sarah felt the ground open beneath her feet. How was it possible there was no record of all the work she had done? "There must be some mistake. I'm sure I worked in the inpatient wing." "Look, dear, I can only give you what's in the official files. And here it clearly states you never worked directly with patients." She left the hospital with a paper in her hands that completely denied the reality she had lived for decades. How could she prove now that she had cared for Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison? That night, sitting in the smelly house with her children sleeping on a mattress on the floor, Sarah Miller felt more desperate than ever. Mrs. Harrison's letters were scattered around her, each one representing a failed attempt at communication, a missed opportunity. It was then that she remembered Nurse Rose, a woman already retired who had worked in the inpatient ward for many of the years Sarah had been at the hospital. If anyone could confirm that she had cared for Mrs. Harrison, it would be Rose. The next day she got Rose's address through an old co-worker. The nurse lived in a simple but well-kept house in the low-income outskirts of the town. When Sarah knocked on the door, she was greeted by a woman with white hair and a gentle smile. "Sarah, what a wonderful surprise! Come in, come in." Rose welcomed her warmly, serving coffee and homemade cookies. When Sarah told her about her situation, the nurse's expression turned serious. "Of course I remember you taking care of the patients. You were always very dedicated, went beyond your duties. And I remember Mrs. Harrison perfectly. A very polite lady, always alone. Would you remember to testify to that in court?" Rose hesitated for a moment. "Sarah, you know I have a small pension from the hospital. If I testify against their interests, I could have problems." "It's not against the hospital. It's just to confirm that I really did care for the patients during my breaks." "Let me tell you something you might not know," said Rose, lowering her voice. "The hospital always knew that some cleaning staff did extra care for the patients. In fact, it was convenient for them, because it meant less work for the official nurses. But they never documented it officially, because it would be a legal problem." "How so?" "Staff without medical training cannot officially provide patient care. If something went wrong, the hospital would be held responsible, so they turned a blind eye but never recorded it." Sarah began to understand the scale of the problem. The hospital had benefited from her extra work for years, but now denied any record to legally protect itself. "Rose, would you help me prove this?" The nurse sighed deeply. "Sarah, you are a good person. You deserve this inheritance more than anyone. I will testify on your behalf, come what may." With Rose's promise, Sarah felt a spark of hope rekindle. But she knew she still faced many battles ahead. When she returned to Mr. Walter Vance, Esquereux's office with Rose's confirmation as a witness, she found an unpleasant surprise waiting for her. There was another man in the room, a sleek man in an expensive suit and an arrogant posture. "Sarah, this is Sterling Harrison, Mrs. Harrison's nephew," said the lawyer. Sterling looked her up and down with evident disdain, from her simple clothes to her calloused hands. "So you're the opportunist trying to steal my aunt's inheritance," he said in a cold voice. "I am not an opportunist. Your aunt left me this inheritance because she wanted to. My aunt was senile in her last years. She didn't know what she was doing. A rich and lonely woman easily manipulated by anyone who showed a little attention." Sterling's words wounded Sarah deeply. She remembered Mrs. Harrison as a lucid, intelligent woman who talked about literature, history, and politics with impressive knowledge. Your aunt was not senile. She was a very intelligent person. "You don't even have the education to assess that," retorted Sterling. "A poorly educated cleaning woman trying to convince a court that she deserves a multi-million-dollar inheritance. It's ridiculous." "Mr." Vance intervened before the discussion escalated. "Jacob, let's maintain civility. Sarah, he has the legal right to contest the will. We'll need to prove not only that you cared for Mrs. Elizabeth, but also that she was of sound mind when she made the will. How do we prove that?" Mrs. Elizabeth had regular psychiatric evaluations in her later years on medical recommendation. All of them confirmed she was mentally capable, but Jacob has reports from other doctors suggesting otherwise. The battle was intensifying, and Sarah realized she was entering a world where she didn't know the rules. People with money and education against a poor cleaning lady. The odds seemed impossible. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Sarah's life was turned upside down. Sterling Harrison had hired a private investigator to dig through her life for anything he could use against her in court. The man showed up at the hospital asking everyone about her. "Do you know Sarah Miller? Is she honest? Have you had any problems with her?" he asked everyone he met. Most of Sarah's colleagues were loyal and didn't say anything compromising, but some, especially the supervisors, started speaking ill of her out of fear of getting involved in trouble. Mr. Arthur called her for a private conversation. "Sarah, this inheritance business is causing problems here at the hospital. The investigator is asking a lot of questions, poking through files. The administration is not happy at all. It's not my fault. Maybe it would be better for you to drop this whole thing. There are rumors you could be fired if you keep causing trouble." The threat was clear. After 28 years of work, they were willing to let her go to get rid of the nuisance. Sarah felt a mix of anger and fear. She needed the job to support her children, but she also knew that inheritance could change their lives forever. At home, the situation was also deteriorating. The smell from the sewer seemed to be getting worse every day, and Emily developed an allergy that made her eyes constantly red and swollen. Jacob started being ashamed to bring friends home because of the odor. "Mom, when are we getting out of here?" he asked one night, trying to breathe through his mouth to avoid the smell. "Soon, my son. Mom is trying to resolve a situation that could get us a better house. Do you promise?" "I promise I'll do everything I can." But doubts began to creep into her thoughts. What if Sterling was right? What if she really didn't deserve that inheritance? What if she was being too ambitious, dreaming of a life that wasn't hers? It was then that she received an unexpected visit. Rose knocked on her door one night with a worried expression. "Sarah, we need to talk. I had a visitor today." "What kind of visitor?" "A well-dressed man said he was Sterling Harrison's lawyer. He offered me money not to testify in your favor." Sarah's blood ran cold. "How much money?" $5,000. He said it was for me to reconsider my version of events." "And what did you say?" "I told him to get out of my house. But I'm worried, Sarah. If they're offering a bribe, it's because they know my testimony could make a difference." Rose was right. Her testimony was crucial, and now Sterling was trying to silence her with money. It showed they took the threat seriously, but it also revealed what kind of people they were. "Rose, you can't accept that money." "Of course I won't accept it, but I worry about you, my dear. These people have power and won't hesitate to use dirty methods to get what they want." As if to confirm Rose's words, the next day Sarah Miller found a letter in her mailbox. It was from Sterling Harrison, written on expensive letterhead. "Mrs. Miller, I believe we can resolve this situation amicably, without the need for a long and draining legal process. I am willing to offer you $20,000 to relinquish any claim to my aunt's inheritance. It is a generous sum that will allow you to buy a decent house and provide a better life for your children. I ask that you consider my proposal seriously. Sterling Harrison." $20,000. It was more money than Sarah had ever seen in her entire life. It would be enough to buy a simple house, get the kids out of that toxic environment, maybe even take a technical course to improve her job prospects. But she also knew the full inheritance was worth much more than that. Sterling was offering crumbs for her to give up her right to a feast. That night, she talked to Jacob and Emily about the situation, adapting the language so they could understand. "Kids, you know Mommy is trying to get money so we can buy a better house, right?" "Yes, Mommy," replied Emily, always more emotional. "Will you get it?" "I don't know, sweetie. There are people trying to stop Mommy from getting that money. They're offering a smaller amount for me to give up, trying to get the larger amount." "How much smaller?" asked Jacob, always practical. "Enough to buy us a small house, but not enough for us to stop worrying about money." "Mommy, I don't mind if our house is small," said Emily. "I just don't want it to smell bad like this one. And I want you to not have to work so hard anymore," added Jacob. "You always come home tired." Her children's words touched Sarah's heart deeply. They were willing to accept less as long as she didn't suffer so much. But should she accept crumbs when she had a right to the full feast? The next day, she went to see Mr. Walter Vance, Eskimo, to tell him about the bribery attempts. "This is serious," he said. "Attempting to bribe a witness is a crime. We can use this against them in court. But won't that make everything even more complicated?" "Perhaps, but it also shows they're desperate. If the inheritance weren't truly yours by right, they wouldn't need to resort to these methods." Mr. Vance was right, but Sarah felt the weight of the battle she was facing. On one side, powerful people with unlimited resources. On the other, her and a retired nurse trying to prove the truth. "Doctor, I need to tell you something. I'm being pressured at work. My supervisor said I could be fired if I continue with this inheritance story." "That's intimidation. We can use that against them too." "But if I get fired, how will I support my children while the case isn't settled?" It was a terrible dilemma. Move forward with the case and risk losing her job, or give up and accept the crumbs Sterling was offering. "Sarah, may I suggest something? How about we talk to some journalists in town? Stories like yours attract press attention. A poor cleaning woman fighting for an inheritance against rich and powerful people. The public tends to sympathize with the underdog." The idea of exposing her life in the newspapers frightened Sarah, but she was beginning to realize she would need to use every weapon available. 2 days later, a journalist from the local newspaper came to see her for an interview. Jennifer Brooks was a young woman, professional in appearance, who seemed genuinely interested in the story. "Mrs. Miller, can you tell me how you met Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison? She was a patient at the hospital where I worked, room 507. Always alone, never had visitors. I would talk to her during my breaks, bring her hot tea when she couldn't sleep. And she never mentioned having any relatives? Once she commented about a nephew but said he only showed up when he needed money, that he was a self-interested person who didn't really care about her. Is the nephew Sterling Harrison?" "I believe so." The interview lasted almost 2 hours. Jennifer asked detailed questions about Sarah's life, her working conditions at the hospital, the discovery of the letters, the shabby house she had received after decades of service. "One last question, Ms. Sarah. If you could speak directly to Sterling Harrison right now, what would you say to him?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I would say that his aunt was a special woman who deserved to have been loved and cared for by her family, not just by a cleaning lady she barely knew, and that if he truly cared about her, he would be honoring her last wishes instead of trying to nullify them." The story was published on the front page of the local newspaper 3 days later, under the headline, "Cleaning Lady Fights for Inheritance After 28 Years of Dedication to Hospital." The text told the full story, from the years of underpaid work to the discovery of the letters in the shabby house. The reaction was immediate. Other people who had been patients at the hospital called the newspaper to tell how Sarah had been kind and attentive to them. Former co-workers also came forward to give favorable statements. But Sterling's reaction was swift and furious. He sued the newspaper for defamation and sent a threatening letter to Sarah through his lawyers. "The publication of false and slanderous information about my client will not be tolerated. Any repetition of these accusations will result in legal action for moral and material damages." The pressure was mounting from all sides. At the hospital, Mr. Arthur called her in for another friendly chat. "Sarah, this story came out in the paper. Now everyone is talking about the hospital. The administration is not at all pleased." "I only told the truth." The truth sometimes bothers the right people. You need to decide. Do you want to keep your job, or do you want to continue with this impossible battle? It's not impossible. I have a right to that inheritance. A right? A cleaning lady has a right to millions? You're dreaming too big, Sarah. Accept Sterling's offer, buy a simple little house, and be happy. Don't try to be what you're not. Mr. Arthur's words echoed in Sarah's head for days. Don't try to be what you're not. Was he right? Did a poor cleaning lady really have no right to dream big? It was Rose who pulled her out of this spiral of doubt. The retired nurse showed up at her house with a determined expression. "Sarah, you can't give up now." "Rose, I'm tired. Maybe I should accept the 20,000 sterling is offering, and let him disrespect Mrs. Elizabeth's memory. Let them think a poor person has no right to receive generosity from a rich person. But what if I lose everything? The job, the house, and still not get the inheritance? My dear, I've lived 82 years in this world. I've seen a lot, good and bad. And one thing I've learned is that when you're right, you must fight for it, even if it's hard. Mrs. Elizabeth left that inheritance to you because she wanted to. She knew you deserved it. Don't let greedy people destroy a good lady's last wish." Rose's words rekindled the fire in Sarah's soul. She was right. It wasn't just about the money, but about honoring Mrs. Elizabeth's memory and fighting for what was fair. The next day, she called Mr. Vance. "Mr. Vance, I won't accept Sterling's offer. Let's take the lawsuit all the way." "Are you sure? It will be a difficult battle." "I'm sure. Mrs. Elizabeth wanted me to have this inheritance. I won't disappoint her." "Very well. Then let's prepare for war." The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Sarah Miller had never been in a courtroom before, and the prospect deeply frightened her. Mr. Vance Iskemers coached her on how to dress, how to behave, what kind of questions they might ask. "Sarah, it's important that you be natural, sincere. Tell the truth about your relationship with Mrs. Elizabeth. But be prepared because Miguel's lawyer will try to discredit you, question your honesty, your capability." "How so?" "He will try to prove you are an opportunist who manipulated an elderly lady. He will question your education, your social standing, suggest you don't deserve this inheritance. And how should I respond? With the truth. Talk about your genuine affection for Mrs. Elizabeth, about the conversations you had, about how you cared for her well-being without expecting anything in return." In the week before the trial, Sarah could barely sleep. The children noticed her nervousness and tried to comfort her the best they knew how. "Mommy, you're going to win," said Emily, hugging her. "You're a good person." "Good people always win in the end," added Jacob, despite his young age showing a wisdom that moved her. If only it were that simple, thought Sarah. In the real world, good people didn't always win. Sometimes they were exactly the ones who suffered the most. On the morning of the trial, she woke before dawn. She put on her best dress, combed her hair carefully, and looked at herself in the mirror. She saw a 42-year-old woman with premature wrinkles caused by hard work and stress, but also with an iron determination in her eyes. "Mrs. Elizabeth," she murmured to the mirror, "if you can hear me from where you are, give me strength for today." The town courthouse was an imposing building that intimidated Sarah from the moment she set foot in it. Long corridors, marble floors, high ceilings, everything designed to impress and, in a way, to frighten people like her. Mr. Vance Esgasser was waiting for her at the entrance, accompanied by Rose, who had dressed in her best clothes for the occasion. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I can be." The courtroom was fuller than Sarah had expected. Besides the lawyers and those directly involved in the case, there were journalists, onlookers, and even some of her old colleagues from the hospital who had come to support her. Sterling Harrison was seated at the front table, next to two elegantly dressed lawyers. When Sarah entered, he looked at her with evident disdain, as if her presence there were a personal affront. The judge, Judge Oliver Thorne, was a middle-aged man, serious-looking, but not intimidating. When everyone was settled, he began the hearing. "We are here to judge the validity of Elizabeth Harrison's will, specifically the clause that leaves the majority of her inheritance to Ms. Sarah Miller. Mr. Vance, you may begin your argument." Mr. Vance Esgers stood up and began to present the case. He spoke about the special relationship between Mrs. Elizabeth and Sarah, about the letters found, about the years of dedicated care that went beyond professional obligations. "Your Honor, Mrs. Elizabeth did not leave her inheritance to a stranger. She left it to a person who treated her with affection and dignity in her most vulnerable moments, a person who saw in her not just another patient, but a human being who deserved love and attention. Next, it was the turn of Miguel's lawyer, Mr. Victor Blackwood Esquerna, a tall, imposing man who spoke with the confidence of someone used to winning every case. Your Honor, we are faced with a classic case of elder manipulation. Elizabeth Harrison, in the last years of her life, was in a state of mental and emotional vulnerability. It was taken advantage of by an opportunistic employee who saw in the victim's loneliness a chance for easy enrichment. Mr. Blackwood's words hurt Sarah like dagger thrusts. Being called manipulative and opportunistic publicly was humiliating, especially when she knew she had acted only with kindness. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, the petitioner possesses neither the qualifications nor the social standing to justify such generosity. It is unthinkable that a person of refined upbringing like Elizabeth Harrison would choose to leave millions to a cleaning lady unless she was under undue influence. Mr. Vance stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making discriminatory statements based on social class. Sustained. Mr. Blackwood, stick to the legal facts. But the damage was already done. The lawyer's words echoed through the room, planting doubts in the minds of those listening. Sarah felt her cheeks burning with shame and anger. The first witness called was Rose. The retired nurse approached the witness stand with firm steps, despite her advanced age. Ms. Rose, do you know the petitioner, Sarah Miller? Yes, I do. We worked together at Grace Memorial Hospital for many years. Can you tell us about her behavior with the patients? Sarah was always very dedicated. She did things that weren't her obligation, like talking with lonely patients, bringing them small comforts, staying a few minutes longer with those who needed company. And specifically about Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison. I remember perfectly. Mrs. Harrison was hospitalized for almost 3 months, always alone. Sarah spent part of her breaks in her room talking, listening to her stories. I often saw her bring hot tea to the lady during the night. Was that allowed by the hospital? Rose hesitated for a moment, knowing her answer could have consequences. Officially no, but in practice the supervisors knew and turned a blind eye because it meant less work for the official nurses. Mr. Blackwood rose for cross-examination. Ms. Rose, how old are you? 82. And how long have you been retired? 5 years. 5 years. So you are speaking about events that happened when you were already of advanced age, quite some time ago. Isn't it possible your memory is confusing the facts? My memory is just fine, thank you, and I am certain of what I saw. Did you receive any kind of benefit or promise of benefit to testify in favor of the petitioner? Of course not, Rose replied indignantly. I am here because it is the right thing to do. One last question. Do you have any concrete documented proof that the petitioner actually provided these special cares? At the time, no one documented that sort of thing, but I saw it with my own eyes. Mr. Blackwood smiled with satisfaction, as if he had gotten what he wanted. No further questions, Your Honor. Next, Sterling Harrison himself was called. He approached the witness stand with an arrogant posture, clearly comfortable in that environment. Mr. Harrison, can you tell us about your relationship with your aunt, Elizabeth Harrison? I was the only close relative she had. I visited her regularly, took care of her business, was concerned with her well-being. Sarah knew this was a lie. Mrs. Harrison had mentioned several times that the nephew only showed up when he needed money, that months would go by without her seeing him. And about her mental state in her final years. My aunt was clearly in cognitive decline. She forgot things, repeated stories, sometimes didn't recognize me immediately. She was a vulnerable woman, easily influenced. When you discovered the will in favor of the petitioner, what was your reaction? I was shocked. It was completely uncharacteristic of my aunt's behavior. She was always very cautious with money, never made significant donations even to charitable institutions. Leaving millions to a cleaning lady she barely knew was proof that she was not in full possession of her mental faculties. Mr. Vance stood up for cross-examination. Mr. Miguel, how many times did you visit your aunt during the 3 months she was hospitalized at Grace Memorial Hospital? Miguel hesitated. I don't remember exactly, several times. Do you have any record of these visits? Any witness who can confirm? I don't keep a record of family visits. In fact, Mr. Miguel, isn't it true that you visited your aunt only twice during the entire hospitalization? That is not correct. Mr. Vance picked up a paper from his desk. I have here the hospital's visitor log. Your name appears only twice in 3 months. How do you explain this discrepancy? Perhaps I didn't always sign the log. And isn't it true that your aunt complained about the lack of attention from the family? That she felt abandoned? My aunt sometimes exaggerated in her complaints. Mr. Miguel, when was the last time you spent more than an hour talking with your aunt before the hospitalization? The question caught Miguel off guard. He stammered for a few seconds before answering. I don't remember specific conversations, but we always communicated. Do 5-minute phone conversations count as communication? Mr. Blackwood protested, but it was too late. The image of Miguel as a dedicated nephew was being systematically dismantled. After several other witnesses, it was finally Sarah's turn. When her name was called, she felt her legs tremble. She had never spoken in public, much less in a courtroom full of people. She walked to the witness stand trying to keep her posture straight, but she felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Mr. Vance approached with an encouraging smile. Ms. Miller, can you tell us how you met Elizabeth Harrison? She was hospitalized at the hospital where I worked, room 507. From the first day, I noticed she was always alone, never had visitors. And did that bother you? Yes. No one deserves to go through difficult health moments without someone by their side. So during my breaks, I would spend a few minutes talking with her. What did you talk about? About everything. She told me stories from her youth, talked about books she had read, about places she had visited. She was a very cultured, very interesting person. Did you do this expecting any reward? Never. I did it because I enjoyed her company, and because I saw that she also enjoyed having someone to talk to. Did Ms. Elizabeth ever mention the will to you? No. I only learned about the inheritance when I found her letters in the house I received from the hospital. Mr. Blackwood stood up for the examination, and Sarah felt her heart race. Ms. Miller, how many years of formal education do you have? I finished elementary school. Elementary school. And do you consider yourself qualified to assess a person's mental state? I knew that Miss Elizabeth was a lucid person. Our conversations were very interesting. She demonstrated knowledge about many subjects. But you have no medical or psychological training to make that assessment, correct? No, but just answer yes or no. Do you have training to assess mental capacity? No. Ms. Miller, during these conversations with Elizabeth Harrison, did you ever mention your financial difficulties? Sarah hesitated. She had mentioned it when Miss Elizabeth asked about her life. Sometimes she asked about my life, and I would tell her. So you talked about your difficulties paying rent, supporting your children. If she asked, I answered honestly. And you don't believe that could have influenced her generosity? She was generous by nature, not because I asked for anything. Did you ever ask to borrow money from Elizabeth Harrison? Never, Sarah Miller answered indignantly. I never asked her for anything, but you admit she knew about your financial needs? If she asked about my life, I wasn't going to lie. Mr. Blackwood continued with questions that tried to paint Sarah as an opportunistic manipulator. Each question was like a slap in the face, questioning her honesty, her integrity, her motives. When the questioning finally ended, Sarah returned to her seat feeling crushed. The lawyer's questions had planted doubts even in her own mind. Had she unconsciously manipulated Mrs. Harrison? The trial continued for another 2 hours, with closing arguments from both sides. Mr. Blackwood painted a picture of an opportunistic cleaning lady who took advantage of a rich, vulnerable, and lonely woman. Mr. Vance argued about Mrs. Harrison's genuine generosity and the sincere affection Sarah had shown. Your Honor, said Mr. Vance in his closing argument, this case is not about social class or economic position. It's about recognizing that kindness and generosity can exist between people from different social levels. Elizabeth Harrison saw in Sarah Miller something her own family couldn't offer: genuine affection and companionship in the most difficult moments. In turn, Mr. Blackwood concluded, Your Honor, we need to protect elderly and vulnerable people from opportunists who disguise themselves as good Samaritans. The disproportion between the claimant's social position and the value of the inheritance is clear evidence that something irregular happened. The judge announced he would give his verdict in a week. Sarah left the courthouse exhausted, as if she had been emotionally beaten. Mr. Blackwood's harsh words echoed in her mind, making her question her own motivations. "You did very well," said Mr. Vance, trying to console her. "You spoke with sincerity, and that's what matters. But his questions made me seem like an opportunist. That's his job. Don't let it shake you. You know the truth about your intentions." Rose approached and hugged Sarah. "My dear, you were dignified. Mrs. Harrison would be proud to see how you defended your friendship." But the words of consolation couldn't dissipate the anguish Sarah felt. During the following week, she could barely eat or sleep. The children noticed her state of mind and tried to cheer her up, but it was hard to hide the anxiety. At the hospital, the situation grew even more tense. Her colleagues avoided talking to her, and Mr. Arthur made a point of showing his displeasure at every encounter. "I hope you're satisfied," he said one day. "The hospital has become a laughingstock in town because of your story." "I only told the truth." "Your truth is causing problems for a lot of people." On Wednesday of that week, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from an elderly woman with a fragile but determined voice. "Hello, is this Sarah Miller?" "Yes, it is." "My name is Martha Cooper. I read about your story in the newspaper. I was also a patient at Grace Memorial Hospital about 3 years ago. I remember you." Sarah tried hard to remember, but she attended to so many patients she didn't always keep all the names. "I wanted to say that you were always very kind to me, too. When I was scared before surgery, you stayed talking to me, calming me down. That meant a lot to me." "Thank you for calling, Mrs. Cooper. I would like to testify on your behalf if there's still time. The trial is already over. The judge will give the verdict on Friday." "What a shame. But I want you to know that you deserve this inheritance. People like you are rare in this world." The call from Mrs. Martha warmed Sarah Miller's heart. Throughout the week, she received a few more calls and visits from former patients who wanted to express their support. This reminded her why she had dedicated so many years of her life to caring for people, because she believed everyone deserved to be treated with dignity. On Friday morning, Sarah woke with a strange feeling in her chest. It was the day of the verdict. In a few hours, she would know if her life would change forever or if she would return to the routine of poverty and hardship. She put on her best dress again, combed her hair, and looked at herself in the mirror. Regardless of the outcome, she had fought for what she believed was right. She had defended the memory of Mrs. Elizabeth and honored the friendship they had built. Jacob and Emily asked to skip school and accompany her to the courthouse, but she didn't want to expose them to the tense environment. She kissed their foreheads and promised that, whatever the result, she would continue fighting to give them a better life. The courtroom was even more crowded than at the first hearing. The story had gained regional attention, and journalists from other towns had come to cover the verdict. Sarah sat next to Mr. Walter Vance Esquerns, trying to control her nerves. Sterling Harrison arrived a few minutes later with his team of lawyers. He greeted some acquaintances in the audience, showing confidence in the outcome. When Judge Oliver Thorne entered the room, the silence was absolute. He settled into his chair, organized some papers, and began to speak. After careful analysis of all the evidence presented, testimonies heard, and arguments from both sides, the time has come to render a verdict on the validity of Elizabeth Harrison's will. Sarah's heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Mr. Vance discreetly held her hand, trying to convey support. This case raises important questions about human relationships that transcend social classes and economic positions. The central question is not whether Sarah Miller deserves $1 million inheritance due to her social standing, but rather whether Elizabeth Harrison was of sound mind when she decided to reward someone who offered her genuine affection. The judge paused, looking at both sides. The medical evidence proves that Elizabeth Harrison was mentally capable when she made her will. The psychiatric reports are clear in this regard. As for the allegation of manipulation, no concrete evidence was presented to support this theory. Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. On the other hand, it was proven through the testimony of Nurse Rose Cooper that the claimant indeed provided extra care to the deceased, going beyond her professional duties. This care, while not officially documented, was corroborated by a credible witness. Sterling shifted uneasily in his chair, realizing the decision was not going the way he had expected. As for the allegation that the disproportion between social standing and the value of the inheritance indicates irregularity, this court finds such an argument to be discriminatory and without legal basis. The law allows any person to leave their estate to whomever they wish, regardless of the beneficiary's social class. The judge leaned forward, his voice growing firmer. However, this case presents complexities that demand a balanced solution. Sarah felt her stomach sink. However, rarely brought good news. While this court recognizes Elizabeth Harrison's right to dispose of her assets according to her will, it also recognizes that Sterling Harrison, as the only close relative, has inheritance rights that cannot be completely ignored. Sterling smiled, thinking he had won. Therefore, I rule that the will of Elizabeth Harrison be partially validated. Sarah Miller would receive 70% of the inheritance, including the estate ranch and the corresponding sum of money. The remaining 30% would go to Sterling Harrison as the legitimate succession. The room erupted in murmurs. Sarah stood frozen, trying to process what she had heard. 70% was still an astronomical sum, far more than she had ever dreamed of. But Sterling would also receive a considerable portion. Furthermore, the judge continued, I order Sterling Harrison to pay the court costs for both parties as a penalty for attempting to bribe a witness, a fact that was proven in the court records. Now it was Sterling's turn to turn pale. Paying the court costs for a legal battle of this magnitude represented a significant amount. The judgment is final. If the parties attempt to appeal, the case will be considered a frivolous lawsuit. The judge banged the gavel, ending the trial. For a moment, absolute silence reigned in the room. Then gradually people began to move, talk, congratulate or commiserate, depending on their preferences. Sarah remained motionless for several seconds, unable to believe she had won. 70% of the inheritance. It was still far more than she had ever imagined possessing. Mr. Walter Vance, Esquire, hugged her, tears in his eyes. Congratulations, Sarah. You deserved every penny. Nurse Rose approached and hugged her too, crying with emotion. Mrs. Elizabeth would have been so happy, she whispered. So happy. Sterling passed by them as he left the courtroom, with an expression of barely contained hatred. He muttered something inaudible, probably a threat or a curse, but said nothing aloud. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now, continuing. Journalists surrounded Sarah as soon as she left the courthouse, asking questions, requesting statements. She was still in shock, barely able to form coherent sentences. How do you feel about winning the case? I still can't believe it. I just want to go home and hug my children. What do you plan to do with the inheritance money? First, I'm going to move out of that awful house we're living in. My children deserve a decent place to live. Any message for Sterling Harrison? I hope he learns to value his aunt's memory, even if it's too late. When she finally managed to get away from the journalists, Sarah went straight home. Jacob and Emily were waiting anxiously for her, having skipped school to await the result. So, Mum? Asked Jacob as soon as she walked through the door. Sarah knelt and hugged both children, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. We won, my darlings. We're going to have a new house, a new life. Really? Asked Emily, her little eyes shining with hope. Really, my daughter? Mrs. Elizabeth kept her promise. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mr. Vance began the procedures for transferring the inheritance, which would take a few weeks to complete. Meanwhile, Sarah had to deal with the sudden attention her story had attracted. She received dozens of phone calls from people congratulating her, others asking to borrow money, some offering investment opportunities, and even marriage proposals from men she had never seen in her life. Everyone wants to be your friend now, observed Rose during a visit. But you already know who your true friends are. Rose was right. In the following weeks, Sarah discovered who really cared about her and who was only interested in her new financial situation. Some colleagues from the hospital who had barely spoken to her before suddenly became very solicitous and friendly. Mr. Arthur, who had been so hostile during the process, completely changed his attitude. "Sarah, I always knew you had potential. How about a promotion? You could be a cleaning supervisor." "Thank you, Mr. Arthur, but I'm going to leave the hospital." "Leave? Why?" "You have job security here. Because after 28 years, I want to try something new." The news that Sarah was leaving her job caused a stir at the hospital. Some colleagues were genuinely sad about her departure. Others showed poorly disguised envy. "Now that you're rich, you don't care about us anymore," murmured Shirley, one of the oldest cleaners. "That's not it, Shirley. You will always be important to me, but I need to seek new paths." "Easy to say when you have millions in the bank." Comments like that hurt Sarah, who had expected more support from people she had known for decades, but she was learning that money changed not only her life, but also how people saw her. The first thing she did when she received a portion of the inheritance was to look for a new house for her and the children. She wanted something simple, but clean and dignified, far from the sewer smell that had poisoned her lungs for months. She found a small but cozy house in a middle-class neighborhood with 3 bedrooms, a backyard where the children could play, and most importantly, clean air to breathe. When Jacob and Emily saw the house for the first time, they ran through all the rooms shouting with joy. "Mommy, will we each have our own room?" asked Emily, still in disbelief. "Yes, my love, and you can decorate them however you want." "And there's a bathroom inside the house," exclaimed Jacob, as if it were the greatest wonder in the world. For children who had spent months sharing a single smelly room, that simple house seemed like a palace. The move was done quickly. Sarah bought new furniture, simple but comfortable. She didn't want to show off, just dignity. She wanted her children to grow up in an environment where they wouldn't be ashamed to have friends over. A few weeks later, she received an unexpected visit. It was Mr. Walter Vance Escunasa bringing news about the rural property that was also part of the inheritance. "Sarah, I need you to see the estate ranch you inherited. It's larger and more valuable than we imagined." The following weekend, she and the children went to see the property. It was a 2-hour drive from town, in a region of green mountains and valleys. The main house was large and well-maintained, with a wide porch and a view of the mountains. "My God," murmured Sarah, looking at the expanse of land that now belonged to her. "All of this is ours." 300 acres of fertile land, confirmed Mr. Walter Vance-esque. "There's also cattle, crops, and a small house where a caretaker who has taken care of everything for years lives. The caretaker, Mr. Samuel, was an elderly man with calloused hands and a gentle smile. He had known Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison personally and spoke of her fondly. Mrs. Elizabeth used to come here every month before she got sick. She was a very good woman, treated everyone with respect. When I learned she had left the ranch to you, I was very happy. She always said she wanted this place to be cared for by someone who understood the value of simple things." Sarah spent the day walking around the property, trying to grasp the reality that all of it was hers. There was a small abandoned school that Mrs. Elizabeth had built years before for the children of the farm workers in the area. There was also a simple chapel, where she sat for a few minutes in silence, giving thanks for the generosity that had transformed her life. "Mum, are we going to live here?" asked Jacob, running through the fields. "I don't know, son. It's very far from town, from your school." "But it's so beautiful," said Emily, picking wildflowers. Sarah knew she wouldn't move to the ranch at that moment. The children needed to continue their studies in the city. But she began to dream of possibilities for the future. Back in town, Sarah Miller made some important decisions. First, she decided to finish high school through adult education. If she was going to manage such a significant inheritance, she needed a better education. "Mommy is going to school?" asked Emily, finding the idea funny. "It's never too late to learn, my dear, and I want to set an example for you." Second, she decided to hire an accountant and a financial manager to help her handle the money responsibly. She didn't want to be one of those people who receive a large inheritance and lose it all through mismanagement. Mr. Walter Vance, Esquerras, introduced her to a trustworthy accountant, Charles Henderson, a young but experienced man, who advised her on safe investments and financial planning. "Ms. Miller, with this amount well managed, You and your children can live comfortably for the rest of your lives without ever worrying about money again. But it's important to make smart choices. I don't want luxury. I just want security and dignity. That's the right attitude. We'll invest most of it in conservative funds that guarantee a good monthly income and set aside a smaller portion for personal goals. Sarah also decided to help some people who had been important on her journey. She gave a generous gift to Rose, who had risked her retirement to testify on her behalf. The nurse cried when she received the money. "Sarah, I didn't do that expecting a reward." "I know, Rose, but you deserve it. Use it to travel, to do things you've always wanted to do." She also helped some colleagues from the hospital who were going through financial difficulties, always discreetly without fanfare. She discovered that giving was almost as good as receiving, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Sterling Harrison, despite having lost in court, didn't give up on causing trouble. He spread rumors around town that Sarah was getting too big for her britches because of the money, that she had forgotten her humble origins. "Now that she's rich, she doesn't greet anyone anymore," he would say to anyone who would listen. This wasn't true. Sarah continued to greet everyone with the same kindness as always, but some people interpreted her newfound confidence as arrogance. There were also scam attempts. People showed up claiming to be distant relatives. Others offered once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunities that were actually schemes to steal her money. "Everyone wants a piece of your pie now," observed Charles, the accountant. "It's important to learn to say no." Saying no was one of the hardest lessons Sarah had to learn. She had spent her whole life helping others and being generous even beyond her means. Now, with the resources to help, she had to be more selective so as not to be exploited. A few months after receiving the inheritance, Sarah decided to take a trip with the children to see places she had never visited. They went to the state capital, visited museums, the theater, the zoo. For Jacob and Emily, who had never left the small town where they were born, it was an incredible adventure. "Mom, can we travel anywhere in the world now?" asked Jacob during the outing. "We can travel to many places, but always responsibly. The money we have needs to last our whole lives. And when I grow up, will I be rich too?" "You will be whatever you choose to be, my son. Money helps, but it doesn't define who we are." During the trip, Sarah had time to reflect on all the changes in her life. 6 months earlier, she was living in a run-down house breathing in sewer gases with no prospects for improvement. Now she had financial security, a decent home, and the possibility of offering a quality education for her children. But she also realized that money brought responsibilities she hadn't anticipated. People expected her to behave in a certain way, to make certain choices. Some wanted her to remain humble and simple. Others expected her to adopt a luxurious lifestyle fitting her new situation. "You've changed," said an old neighbor during a chance meeting at the market. "Changed how?" "You're different. More confident, I guess." "Is that bad?" "It's not bad, but it's different. Sometimes it seems like you're not the same Sarah from before." The comment bothered Sarah for days. Had she really changed? Was she becoming a different person because of the money? She talked about it with Rose during one of their weekly visits to each other. "Of course you've changed, my dear," said the nurse. "You don't have to bow down to everyone anymore. You don't have to accept humiliation for fear of losing your job. That's given you confidence, dignity, and some people don't like seeing that. But I don't want people to think I'm being arrogant. There's a difference between arrogance and self-esteem. You don't have to shrink yourself to make others feel comfortable." Rose was right. Sarah was learning to value herself, something that had been difficult during years of underpaid work and disrespect. It wasn't arrogance, it was recognition of her own worth. She then decided she would use part of the inheritance for a project to honor Mrs. Elizabeth's memory. She sought out Mr. Vance to discuss her ideas. "Doctor, I want to use some of the money to create something that helps other people in the situation I was in before. Perhaps an assistance program for hospital employees who are going through hard times." "That's a very noble idea, Sarah. Mrs. Elizabeth would be proud." "I also thought about renovating that abandoned school on the estate ranch to offer education for children from the rural area." Both are excellent projects. We can structure this legally as a foundation. In the following months, Sarah worked on developing these projects. She created the Elizabeth Harrison Foundation, dedicated to education and social assistance. The first program offered scholarships for children of hospital employees, something that could have changed her own life decades earlier. The second project was to renovate and reopen the rural school on the ranch. She hired qualified teachers and offered free, quality education to children from neighboring ranches who previously had to travel hours to reach the nearest school. "Mommy is building a school?" asked Emily, impressed with the renovation photos. "I'm helping to build a better future for other children, just like someone helped me build a better future for you." The school's inauguration was an emotional event. Dozens of rural families attended, many with children who could study there. Sarah cut the ribbon with trembling hands, remembering Mrs. Elizabeth and how one person's kindness can reverberate through the years. Mr. Samuel, the caretaker, approached her during the ceremony. "Mrs. Elizabeth would be very proud of you today. She always dreamed of seeing this school running again." "Why did she close the school before?" "Lack of resources and community support, but now with you taking care of it, I'm sure it will run for many years." That night, alone at the ranch where she had decided to spend the weekend, Sarah looked at the stars and spoke mentally to Mrs. Elizabeth. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." The first year after receiving the inheritance was one of adaptation and learning. Sarah had to learn to deal with lawyers, accountants, managers. She had to make complex financial decisions, manage social projects, handle media attention. But the hardest part was learning how to relate to people in her new social position. Some treated her with excessive reverence because of her wealth, others with resentment over her sudden social ascent. "Money changes everything," she reflected during a conversation with Rose. "Not just your life, but how people see you." "The important thing is not to let it change who you are inside," replied the nurse. "You're still the same kind person I met at the hospital." In the second year, Sarah decided to return to studying more seriously. She enrolled in a college-level administration course, something she had never imagined possible. At 43, she sat in classrooms alongside 20-year-olds, but she wasn't intimidated. "My mom is in college," Jacob would proudly tell his friends. "She's going to graduate and get a diploma. And we'll be there to see it," Emily would add. Studying was challenging, but also rewarding. Sarah discovered she had an aptitude for numbers and planning, skills that helped her better manage her inheritance and her social projects. During the course, she met other mature students who, like her, had decided to pursue formal education later in life. She formed a study group with them, and those friendships became important for her personal development. One day, during a project management class, the professor used the Elizabeth Harrison Foundation as an example of a successful organization. Sarah was moved to see her work being recognized academically. Alongside her studies, she continued expanding her social projects. She created a microcredit program for hospital employees who wanted to start small businesses, and an emergency fund for health situations that exceeded families' financial means. The rural school also grew. In its second year, it was already serving 50 children and offered not only basic education, but also technical courses for youth and adults. Sarah visited the school monthly, talking with teachers, students, and parents. "You saved our children's future," said one mother during one of these visits. "Before, they would have had to choose between working on the estate ranch or traveling 3 hours a day to study." "It wasn't me who saved it," Sarah replied. "It was Mrs. Elizabeth through her generosity." In the third year, she received an unexpected proposal. The town's mayor approached her to suggest she run for city councilwoman. "Sarah, you have popular recognition, resources to campaign, and most importantly, you know the needs of the humblest people in our town." The idea frightened her at first. Her, a former cleaning lady, running for political office. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea made sense. She truly knew the problems of working people. She had developed management experience through her social projects. "What do you think?" she asked Jacob and Emily, who were already smart, opinionated teenagers. "Mom, you've always helped people," said Emily. "As a councilwoman, you could help even more. And you understand the problems of the poor better than any rich politician," added Jacob. She decided to accept the suggestion and ran. Her campaign was different from the others. It focused on concrete proposals based on her life experience. She visited poor neighborhoods where other candidates rarely appeared. She talked directly with workers about their needs. "You know me," she would say in her speeches. "You know where I come from. You know I understand your struggles, because they were my struggles too." The campaign sparked varied reactions. Some supported her enthusiastically, seeing in her a genuine representative of the working classes. Others criticized, claiming she lacked political experience or sufficient education. Sterling Harrison, who remained bitter over the loss in court, was one of her most virulent opponents, spreading rumors about her capability and character. "A cleaning lady wanting to be a city councilwoman," he would say. "What's next? Running for mayor?" But his smear campaign had the opposite effect of what he intended. Many people identified with Sarah Miller's journey and felt offended by Sterling's classist attacks. On election day, Sarah was nervous. She had run an honest campaign and worked hard, but she knew politics was unpredictable. She voted early, accompanied by her children and Rose, and spent the day following the vote count. When the results began to be announced, it became clear she had achieved something extraordinary. She was the city's top vote-getter for city council, with over 60% of the votes in her electoral district. "We won!" shouted Jacob, hugging his mother. "Mommy is going to be a city councilwoman," celebrated Emily. At the victory party, Sarah gave an emotional speech. "This victory isn't just mine. It belongs to all the workers who feel forgotten by traditional politics. It belongs to all the women who juggle work and motherhood. It belongs to all the people who believe a humble origin doesn't stop anyone from dreaming big." As a city councilwoman, Sarah stood out for her dedication and closeness to her constituents. She created a community office that was also open on Saturdays to serve people who couldn't take time off work during the week. Her first proposed laws were aimed at improving working conditions for municipal public employees, especially those in jobs considered lesser, like cleaning and maintenance. "Those who take care of the city deserve to be well taken care of," she would say. She also proposed the creation of municipal daycare centers for workers' children, adult literacy programs, and improvements in public health. Her proposals were always based on real needs she knew from personal experience. In the 4th year after receiving the inheritance, Sarah looked back and could hardly believe the transformation of her life. From a cleaning lady living in a precarious house, she had become a social entrepreneur, a university student, and an elected official. But the most important thing was that she had managed to keep her core values: simplicity, generosity, and a genuine concern for the well-being of others. Jacob, now 12, had developed an interest in medicine, inspired by the stories his mother told about her time at the hospital. Emily, 10, wanted to be a teacher and already volunteered at the rural school on weekends. "You two can be whatever you want to be," Sarah would tell them. "The world is open to you in a way it wasn't for me at your age." "But Mom, you achieved everything you wanted, even though you started as a cleaning lady," Jacob observed. "That's true, my son, but it was much harder than it needed to be. For you it will be different." During a visit to the estate ranch that year-end, Sarah walked to the chapel where she had sat years before to give thanks for the inheritance she received. Now she returned to give thanks again, but for everything she had managed to build from that initial gift. "Mrs. Elizabeth," she said aloud, no longer caring if anyone heard her talking to herself, "you didn't just give me money. You gave me the opportunity to discover who I really could be." The wind rustled the trees around the chapel, and for a moment Sarah felt that Mrs. Elizabeth was there, approving all that had been done. Mr. Samuel approached, as he always did when he saw her at the chapel. "Talking to Mrs. Elizabeth again?" "I always talk to her when I come here. I think she likes to know how things are going." "I'm sure she does. And I'm sure she is very proud of you." In her 5th year, Sarah Miller graduated with a degree in business administration at 47. The graduation ceremony was emotional, with Jacob and Emily in the audience applauding proudly as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. "Mommy, are you a doctor now?" asked Emily. "No, sweetheart. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration, but that's already more than I ever dreamed of being." And will you keep studying? Maybe. I'm thinking about a graduate degree in social management. The graduation also marked the end of a cycle of personal transformation. Sarah had become a completely different person from that insecure cleaning woman who had found Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's letters years before. But the greatest transformation was yet to come. During a city council meeting, she received an unexpected proposal. A group of local business owners wanted her to run for mayor in the upcoming election. You have popularity, you have concrete projects, and most importantly, you have credibility with the most needy population, said one of them. It would be a strong candidacy. The idea of being mayor frightened and excited her at the same time. It would be an enormous responsibility, but also an opportunity to implement even more significant changes. She talked with her family, with Rose, with her advisors. The opinion was unanimous she should try. "Mom, remember when you said we could be whatever we wanted to be?" said Jacob. "You can be mayor if you want to. And you'll help so many more people," added Emily. The campaign for mayor was intense and hard-fought. Sarah faced candidates with far more political experience and financial resources, but she had something they lacked, a genuine connection with the needs of the people. Her main proposal was to create a municipal program inspired by her social projects. Microcredit for small business owners, quality schools in every neighborhood, comprehensive assistance for needy families. "I don't promise miracles," she said at her rallies. "I promise serious work and total dedication. I promise that every dollar of the municipality will be used with honesty and transparency." Her opponent's campaign tried to disqualify her, questioning her ability to govern an entire city. Sterling Harrison, who had never gotten over his defeat in court, financed flyers attacking her humble origins. "Do you want a former cleaning woman governing our city?" the flyers asked. Once again, the strategy backfired. The population identified with her even more, seeing the attacks as unacceptable prejudice against working people. On election day, the victory was overwhelming. Sarah was elected mayor with over 70% of the valid votes, a result that surprised even her most optimistic supporters. "My people," she said in her victory speech, "today, you didn't just elect a mayor. You elected a representative of all the workers who have been underestimated, of all the women who have been disrespected, of all the families who struggle to live with dignity." The inauguration as mayor, 6 years after finding Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's letters, was the pinnacle of a transformation that had seemed impossible. Sarah walked up the steps of the City Hall accompanied by her children, by Rose, by Mr. Walter Vance, Esquirn, and by hundreds of people who had followed her journey. In her first speech as mayor, she was moved as she remembered the path she had traveled. "A few years ago, I lived in a ramshackle house, breathing in sewer gases, with no prospects for a better future for me and my children. Today, by the will of the people, I assume the responsibility of caring for our city. This was only possible because a special person, Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." In the audience, Rose wept with emotion. Mr. Walter Vance Esquirn smiled with pride. Jacob and Emily, now teenagers, looked at their mother with admiration and pride. As mayor, Sarah Miller implemented innovative programs based on her life experience and years of social work. She created Municipal Dignity, a program that offered decent housing for families in precarious situations, ensuring no one else had to live in conditions like those she had faced. She also implemented Opportunity for All, which offered vocational education for adults, microcredit for small businesses, and comprehensive assistance for needy families. The results were impressive. In 2 years, unemployment in the town was cut in half and education rates improved significantly. But her most cherished project was the expansion of the rural school network based on the model of the school she had created at Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's estate ranch. In 4 years of government, she built 12 schools in rural communities that previously had no access to quality education. "Education is the only way to break the cycle of poverty," she would say at her inaugurations. "Every child who studies here is a victory against inequality." In the 7th year after receiving the inheritance, Sarah took stock of everything she had achieved. She had become one of the most popular mayors in the state, with approval ratings above 80%. Her social programs were copied by other towns, and she was often invited to speak about public management and social transformation. But more important than public recognition was the certainty that she had honored Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's legacy. The inheritance had not just been money, but an opportunity to discover her potential and use that potential to help others. Jacob, at 16, was finishing high school and had already been accepted to a public university to study medicine. His dream was to specialize in pediatrics and work in public hospitals, helping needy families like his had been. Emily, at 14, was a brilliant student with a special talent for literature and education. Her life project was to become a teacher and school principal, following in her mother's footsteps in the field of social education. "You two are becoming better people than I ever dreamed of being," Sarah said to them during a family dinner. "Mom, you are our inspiration," Jacob replied. "If you manage to escape poverty and become mayor, we can achieve anything. But always remember, success is not measured only by what we achieve, but by the good we do for others." "You taught us that since we were little," said Emily. "That's why we want to work helping people like you do." Rose, now 87, continued to be a counselor and faithful friend. Despite her advanced age, she kept a lucid mind and youthful spirit. She often visited the mayor's office to give her opinion on Sarah's projects. "My dear, you have surpassed all the dreams I could have had for you," she said during one of these visits. "Mrs. Elizabeth would be radiant with pride." "Rose, none of this would be possible without your support. You risked your retirement to testify on my behalf when no one else believed in me. I knew you deserved that inheritance, and you proved you deserved it by using the money not just for yourself, but to transform the lives of thousands of people." In the 8th year, Sarah received a proposal to run for state representative. Her popularity had transcended the town's limits, and state political leaders wanted her to bring her experience to a broader level of government. But she decided to decline. She preferred to continue as mayor, where she could directly see the results of her work in people's lives. "Politics is not about climbing the hierarchy," she explained in an interview. "It's about serving, and I serve best by staying close to my people." That same year, she decided to write a book telling her story, not out of vanity, but to inspire other people who might be going through difficulties similar to those she had faced. The book, titled Letters of Hope, A Journey of Transformation, became a regional bestseller. Sarah Miller donated all the royalties to the Elizabeth Harrison Foundation, which continued to grow and help more and more people. "Why did you decide to write the book?" asked a journalist during the launch. "Because I want other people to know that no matter how difficult your current situation is, with work, dignity, and a little luck, it's possible to completely transform your life. And more importantly, it's possible to use that transformation to help others." The success of the book brought invitations to speak across the country. Sarah began traveling frequently to tell her story at universities, companies, and social events. Her message was always the same: never underestimate the power of an act of kindness, and never give up on your dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem. During one of these talks, she met other people who had gone through similar transformations. She formed an informal network of social transformers, people who had overcome extreme difficulties and were now using their experiences to help others. "We all have a story of struggle," she said at one of these meetings. "What makes us special isn't the suffering we went through, but what we do with the opportunities life offers us." In the 9th year after receiving the inheritance, Sarah was making plans for the future. Her term as mayor would end the following year, and she was deciding whether to run for re-election or move on to new challenges. The Elizabeth Harrison Foundation had become one of the largest social organizations in the region, operating schools, microcredit programs, healthcare assistance, and affordable housing projects. Sarah spent more and more time dedicated to the foundation, seeing in it the future of her social work. "Perhaps it's time for me to dedicate myself fully to the foundation," she said to Rose. "Politics was important, but real transformation happens in direct social work." "You have your whole life ahead of you to decide that," replied Rose. "The important thing is that you never stopped growing, learning, transforming." Jacob was finishing his first year of medical school and was already volunteering in the Foundation's social projects. His grades were excellent, and he had received a scholarship for an international exchange. "Mom, when I graduate, I want to work in the Foundation's programs," he said. "I want to treat poor people who can't afford a private doctor like we couldn't before." Emily had become an engaged young woman, participating in discussion groups about education and already giving private lessons to underprivileged children. Her dream of being a teacher had evolved into a desire to reform the Brazilian educational system. "I want to create innovative schools that truly prepare people to transform their lives," she would say. "Schools like the one you created at the estate ranch but spread all over the country." Sarah saw in her children the continuation of her legacy of social transformation. They had grown up seeing that true wealth wasn't in accumulating money, but in using resources to improve the world. One day she received an unexpected call. It was from a lawyer in another city, representing an elderly lady who wanted to make a will similar to Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's. "My client read about your story in the newspaper and was inspired. She is a wealthy and lonely woman and wants to leave her inheritance to a hospital employee who has been kind to her. Can you give us guidance on how to do this the right way?" Sarah was moved by the call. Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's story was inspiring other acts of generosity. "Of course I can help. Kindness begets kindness. When someone is generous, they plant a seed that can grow and multiply." She then began to also work as a consultant for people who wanted to make significant donations in a responsible and effective way. She developed a protocol to verify the integrity of the beneficiaries and structure the donations to generate maximum social impact. In the 10th year, after finding Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's letters, Sarah Miller organized a special ceremony at the estate ranch. It was the 10th anniversary of the inheritance that had transformed her life, and she wanted to celebrate it in a meaningful way. She invited everyone who had been important on her journey: Rose, Mr. Walter Vance Escuernes, former colleagues from the hospital, Foundation staff, students from the school she had created, families helped by her social programs. The ceremony was held in the chapel of the estate ranch, the same place where she had first given thanks for Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's generosity. Now she returned to give thanks for everything she had managed to build from that initial gift. 10 years ago, she said to the gathered crowd, I was a hopeless cleaner, living in a precarious house with my young children. Today, I am the mayor of our town. I run a foundation that helps thousands of people, and I have the opportunity to inspire others to transform their lives. She paused, emotional. But the most important thing is not the titles I've earned or the recognition I've received. The most important thing is knowing that I managed to honor the legacy of a special person, Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Rose, despite her advanced age, stood up to speak. Sarah, you didn't just honor Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's legacy. You created your own legacy. You showed the world that a humble beginning does not determine destiny. That kindness is more powerful than prejudice, that one person can indeed change their life and the lives of many others. Jacob and Emily also spoke at the ceremony, telling how their mother's example had shaped their values and aspirations. Their testimonies moved everyone present. Our mother taught us that receiving a blessing brings the responsibility to be a blessing to others, said Jacob. And she showed us that it doesn't matter where you come from, but where you're going and how many people you help along the way, added Emily. The ceremony ended with the symbolic planting of a tree in the ranch garden, representing the continuous growth of the legacy of transformation that Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison had begun with her generosity. That night, alone at the ranch, Sarah Miller walked through the fields she now knew like the back of her hand. 10 years had passed since she found those letters in the precarious house. 10 years of transformation, growth, achievements, and above all, opportunities to help others. She stopped at the chapel and sat on the same bench where she had sat years before. Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison, she said aloud, thank you for believing in me. Thank you for planting the seed of transformation that grew far beyond what any of us could have imagined. The wind blew softly, rustling the trees around the chapel, and for a moment Sarah had the feeling that Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison was there, smiling and approving all that had been built. In the following months, Sarah made an important decision. She would not run for re-election as mayor. Instead, she would dedicate herself fully to expanding the Elizabeth Harrison Foundation, taking its programs to other towns and states. "Politics gave me a platform to implement important changes," she explained in an interview. "But now, I want to use my experience to create impact on an even larger scale." Her successor as mayor was her deputy, a young lawyer who had worked directly with her and shared her vision of social and transparent governance. During the transition, Sarah Miller made sure that all the programs she had created continued to operate with the same quality and dedication. The foundation, under her full direction, flourished even more. Within 2 years, it was operating in dozens of cities, offering quality education for rural children, microcredit for small entrepreneurs, basic medical assistance for needy families, and affordable housing programs. Jacob graduated from medical school with honors, and true to the promise he made as a teenager, began working in the Foundation's health programs. He specialized in preventive medicine and community health, developing innovative protocols for serving underprivileged populations. Emily graduated in pedagogy and later earned a master's degree in educational management. She became the Foundation's pedagogical director, responsible for developing teaching methodologies adapted to the local realities of each community served. Rose, at 90 years old, remained lucid and active, serving as an honorary advisor to the Foundation. Her decades of experience in the healthcare system were constantly consulted for the development of the assistance programs. "You have created something that will last for generations," she said to Sarah Miller during a board meeting. "Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison planted a seed. You watered it and made it grow, and now Jacob and Emily will ensure it continues to bloom." Sarah, now 50 years old, had become a nationally respected figure in the field of social assistance. She received invitations to participate in government commissions, give lectures at international universities, and advise other social organizations. But she never lost sight of her origins, nor the fundamental lesson Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison had taught her, that true wealth lies in the ability to transform lives, including one's own. During a lecture at a university in the capital, a student asked her, "Professor Sarah, if you could go back in time and avoid all the suffering you went through before receiving the inheritance, would you do it?" She thought for a few moments before answering, "No. Every difficulty I faced taught me something important about compassion, perseverance, and the value of human dignity. If I hadn't gone through those experiences, I wouldn't truly be able to understand the needs of the people I now help through the Foundation. But don't you feel anger for having suffered so much while people who didn't work as hard as you were born rich?" "I felt anger for a long time," she admitted, "but I learned that anger is an energy that can be channeled for transformation. Instead of becoming bitter about the past, I used my indignation as fuel to create a better future for myself and for others who go through similar situations." After the lecture, a young student approached her. "Professor, I come from a very poor family. My parents work as cleaners, just like you used to. Sometimes I feel ashamed of my background when I'm here at the university." Sarah took the young woman's hands and looked directly into her eyes. "My dear, never be ashamed of where you come from. Your parents are dignified people who work honestly to support their family. That is a reason for pride, not shame. Use your education to honor the sacrifice they make for you and to create opportunities so other families don't have to go through the same hardships." The conversation with the student made Sarah reflect on how her journey could inspire others. She then decided to create a special program within the Foundation, full scholarships for the children of workers in so-called menial services, cleaners, sanitation workers, doormen, cooks. "I want these young people to have the opportunities I didn't have at their age," she explained to the Foundation's team. "And I want them to know that a humble origin is not a limitation, it's motivation." The program was an immediate success. Hundreds of young people applied for the scholarships, and many of the recipients became the first in their families to attend college. 3 years later, the first class of scholarship recipients graduated. During the graduation ceremony, Sarah Miller was moved to see young people from humble backgrounds receiving diplomas in medicine, engineering, law, education. "You are proof that talent and determination exist in all social classes," she told the graduates. "Now you have the responsibility to use your knowledge to transform your communities, just as this opportunity transformed your lives." Many of the graduates decided to work in the Foundation's programs, creating a virtuous cycle of social transformation. The organization grew not only in size, but in quality and impact. In the 15th year after finding Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's letters, Sarah received the highest recognition of her work. She was nominated for an International Social Leadership Award, given to people who had made a significant difference in the lives of entire communities. The award ceremony would be in a European capital, and Sarah would travel to receive the award accompanied by Jacob, Emily, and Rose, who, despite being 95 years old, maintained a youthful and adventurous spirit. "I never imagined I would leave the country," said Rose during the trip. "At 95, I'm going to see Europe. And I never imagined that a former cleaner from a small town would represent Brazil at an international event," replied Sarah. The ceremony was grand, with representatives from social organizations all over the world. When Sarah took the stage to receive the award, she briefly told her story, from a cleaner living in a precarious house to a social leader transforming lives on a national scale. "This award is not mine," she said in her acceptance speech. "It belongs to Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison, who planted the seed. It belongs to Rose Silver, who believed in me when few did. It belongs to Jacob and Emily, who grew up seeing that success is measured by the good we do for others. And it belongs to all the thousands of people who transformed their lives through the programs we created together." Upon returning to Brazil, Sarah was received as a national hero. Her story had inspired people across the country, and many similar organizations had been created following the model of the Elizabeth Harrison Foundation. "You have become a symbol of hope for all Brazilians facing difficulties," said a journalist during an interview at the airport. "I'm not a symbol of anything," she replied. "I'm just a person who received an opportunity and decided to use it to help others. Anyone can do the same, each in their own way." Back in the town where it all began, Sarah decided to make a special visit. She went to the house where she had lived after leaving the hospital, that precarious house next to the open sewer, where she had found the letters that changed her life. The house was still there, but now it had been renovated and turned into a community daycare center run by the municipal government. Children played in the backyard where open sewage once ran, and their laughter echoed through the clean air. "It's perfect," she murmured, watching the children run and play. Mrs. Elizabeth would be proud. The daycare director recognized her and came to greet her. "Professor Sarah, what an honor to receive your visit. The children will be so excited." "Actually, I'm the one who's excited. Seeing this place transformed into a space of joy and learning is the fulfillment of a dream." During the visit, a small child approached her. "Aunt, is it true you used to live here when you were poor?" "Yes, it's true. And do you know the most important thing I learned living here?" "What?" "That it doesn't matter where we live or how much money we have. What matters is how we treat people and how hard we work to improve our own lives and the lives of others." The child nodded seriously, as if storing that lesson away for the future. That night, in her comfortable home in the city center, Sarah Miller sat down to write in her journal, a habit she had developed after becoming mayor as a way to record her reflections on leadership and social transformation. "Today, I visited the house where I found Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's letters 15 years ago. Seeing that place transformed into a space of joy and learning made me understand that our journey is complete when we manage to turn places of suffering into places of hope." Mrs. Elizabeth planted a seed of kindness that grew far beyond what any of us could have imagined. Today, thousands of families have better lives because of her generosity, and that reminds me that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the potential to generate immense transformations. Jacob and Emily grew up seeing that true success is not measured by material possessions, but by the positive impact we make on the lives of others. They are the continuation of this legacy of transformation, and I know they will carry forward the values that Mrs. Elizabeth taught us. Rose, at 95, continues to be my advisor and friend. Her loyalty and courage to testify on my behalf when I needed it most changed the course of my life. She taught me that true friendship manifests in difficult times. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I hadn't found those letters. I'd probably still be a cleaner, living in precarious conditions, with no prospects for a better future. But then I remember that destiny isn't just luck, it's the meeting of opportunity with preparation and determination. When I found the letters, I was prepared to value Mrs. Elizabeth's generosity. I was determined to fight for what was right, even when facing powerful people. And most importantly, I was willing to use the opportunity I received not just to improve my own life, but to help others. Today, at 50, I can say I have achieved far more than I ever dreamed, but the most rewarding part isn't the awards or recognition. It's knowing that thousands of children have access to quality education because of the schools we built. It's knowing that hundreds of families have been able to escape poverty through the microcredit programs. It's knowing that young people from humble backgrounds are graduating from universities and transforming their communities. The money I inherited from Mrs. Elizabeth has multiplied many times over through investments and the fruits of the foundation. But more important than the financial multiplication has been the multiplication of social impact. Every transformed life generates other transformations, creating waves of positive change that spread throughout society. My story proves there is no social determinism. Her humble origin does not condemn anyone to eternal poverty. With opportunity, education, and determination, anyone can transform their life. And when someone is truly transformed, they feel the responsibility to help others transform as well. Mrs. Elizabeth didn't just give me money. She gave me the opportunity to discover my potential, to develop my leadership, to learn that generosity is the greatest wealth anyone can possess. She gave me the chance to prove that kindness is not weakness, it is strength. That compassion is not sentimentality, it is wisdom. Now I see my life as a circle closing perfectly. I started as a simple person who cared for others out of the kindness of my heart. I became a leader who cares for thousands through structured programs. But the essence remains the same: to care, to serve, to transform lives. Jacob will follow the path of social medicine, bringing healthcare to underserved communities. Emily will dedicate herself to transformative education, creating opportunities for young people from humble backgrounds. They are the natural continuation of this legacy of service to others, and when my time in this world comes to an end, I hope I can say that I used every opportunity to make a positive difference in the lives of other people, that I transformed the gift I received from Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison into gifts for thousands of others, that I was a link in an endless chain of kindness and transformation, because in the end, what will remain will not be the material possessions or the titles earned. What will remain will be the impact of the lives we touched, the opportunities we created, the hopes we planted. What will remain will be the certainty that some people had better lives because our lives intersected. And that, more than any financial inheritance, is the true wealth we can leave to the world. End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe Sarah Miller's transformation was deserved? Tell us your opinion on how kindness can change lives. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories.